Frances Farmer was an actress on the road to success. She loved the stage and the screen loved her, but her alcoholism and erratic behavior would take years off her life. She would spend time in institutions and remain under the watchful eye of the public. Her life has been sensationalized by the media and betrayed by others who had the inside scoop. Farmer deserved an apology she never got, and the myths surrounding her time in a psychiatric hospital remain today. In today's video, we are discussing her rise and fall in the public eye, the life she won back, and the media's betrayal of Frances Farmer. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Quiet Riot, where we talk film, television, and media. I'm Ainsley, and in today's video we are discussing Frances Farmer, an actress who was popular in the 1940s, but unfortunately her stardom is not exactly discussed in the same way that her life outside of the film world has been discussed. I will put the disclaimer and all possible triggers in the description box below. We deal with various things that could be sensitive for some viewers, so if you need those, they will be in the description box. If you recognize the name but are unsure where you've heard it, chances are it's the 1981 film Frances starring Jessica Lange, or the song by Nirvana. In many ways, her life story has become a pop culture myth, woven into the lexicon of Hollywood stories. Stories passed down for generations and twisted till it doesn't look much like the original story. Most of this can be attributed to Shadowland, published in 1978 by Seattle film reviewer William Arnold. The 1981 movie Frances was initially meant to be an adaptation of Shadowland, but the producers reneged on a deal with Arnold. During the court case with the producers, Arnold revealed that the lobotomy and most of the biography was fictionalized. I guess anything for a paycheck. Unfortunately, the fabricated story of a lobotomy became one of the most known things about Frances Farmer. I have not watched the film Frances, and I do know that it is at least a good movie, but the director himself doesn't seem like a really great guy, because on the DVD commentary track for Frances, director Graham Clifford said, "We didn't want to nickel and dime people to death with facts." When you're telling a true story, I realize that there are going to be things that you're going to want to make maybe a little bit more dramatic, but the overt sensationalization of real people's stories, whether they were famous prior to these things happening or their name became known after their either death or any other tragic event, it's really important to recognize that the true bones and meat of the story is there, and that it's not just all about sensationalizing this story. And while I haven't seen Frances and I cannot really speak to how it portrays Frances herself, I do think with everything that she went through and the abuses that she went through within the system, and being that that is something that not only just Frances has gone through, but people had gone through before that, during that, and since then, it just doesn't sit well with me. And there are so many movies based on real people and historical fact that do sensationalize a lot of things that have happened. They will either try to victimize a particular person that maybe doesn't need to be victimized in the movie, and you view them as a victim of circumstance versus who they really were, or you see that a specific person has been villainized. Now, there's only so much that we as fans of Frances Farmer, or people who just know a little bit about her history, can really know. The only person that truly knows what happened within her entire life was Frances Farmer, and then when you consider the things that happened to her in the hospital, the only people that could truly know are her herself and the people that were there. We do know that some pretty horrible things happened there just on the basis of this being a psychiatric hospital. That was a time where there was a lot of experimental drugs and a lot of experimental treatments, and unfortunately patients were just not treated very well. A big part of that is shock treatment. That was a big thing that happened at this time, and you will find a lot of people in history, whether they are in the entertainment industry or not, who there were in fact shock treatment. We do know of real cases of lobotomies and what it can really do to somebody, and I'm more under the impression that Frances Farmer maybe didn't have one, but that it was a possibility that was put on the table. But what I can tell you is she did experience abuse in the psychiatric system, and she was taken advantage of by people in the system and people outside of it as a result. Even before Farmer's time in the spotlight, those in the public eye had lived through their own struggles in front of the cameras. Family drama, salacious rumors, mental breakdowns, and addictions played a prominent role in the life of those in the entertainment industry. There was something different about Frances Farmer, and its difference would become an all too common thing as the years progressed. From books to magazines and the screen, people are ready to make a buck no matter the cost. And in today's world, with the internet being so vast and there being many different forms of social media, more and more people are spreading rumors and starting lies and essentially making bank off of other people's misery. Frances Farmer was born on 1913 in Seattle, Washington to Lillian and Ernest Farmer. The couple had 3 other children, Edith and Wesley, both born before Frances. The oldest sibling, Ruth, was born during Lillian's first marriage. When Frances was 4 years old, Farmer's parents separated and her mother moved with the children to Los Angeles, where her sister Zella lived. Now, I did watch this show, I can't remember the name of it, but I'll put it on screen, where Frances Farmer went on there, and it's something that is meant to have you get to know the person through their own words, but also have people come on the show that have known you, that are related to you, and tell you something that they know about them or something that they remember about them. And in that show, she seems to mention that her parents had separated before, like, it was even within memory. So I don't know if she just remembered it wrong and it did happen when she was about 1-2 years old, or if they did in fact separate when she was 4. But she does mention not really getting to know her father until she was about 13 years old. So I'm not sure which part is fact, if it was just a misremembrance, which is very possible, but there's those 2 possible timelines. Her mother moved with the children to Los Angeles, where her sister Zella lived. In 1925, Lillian moved with her children to Chico, California to study nutrition. Coming to the conclusion that caring for the children interferes with her work, Zella drove the children to Albany, Oregon, so they could take a train to Seattle to be with their father. In certain ways, that train trip represented the end of my dependent childhood. I began to understand that there were certain things one could expect from adults, and others that one could not expect. Being shunted from one household to another was a new adjustment, a fresh confusion, and I groped for ways to compensate for the disorder. There is a large belief that Frances Farmer didn't really have any type of mental illness, or that the mental illness that she was diagnosed with, there were multiple ones, that they were not true diagnosis. But in seeing some of the things that she went through and the disorder that she went through, and obviously we only know so much, I can imagine that that sense of disorder did affect her mental health, and that she, in her own words, she found ways to essentially compensate for this. And when you're young and there's such little trust that you put in adults and those that you're supposed to be able to rely on, I can imagine that really warps your head. And the things that she kind of got in trouble for on sets, some of it I can see as being something where sexism is a part of it, but I can also imagine that she found it very difficult to trust people and find stability within other people, so whether that's in her personal or professional life. And looking back on that, that's definitely a huge possibility, but I would say there definitely had to be some type of mental illness there, considering the the amount of trouble and how she got into trouble. In 1931, while in high school, Farmer won $100 at the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards for her controversial essay, God Dies. In her autobiography, she wrote that the essay was influenced by her reading of Friedrich Nietzsche. He expressed the same doubts, only he said it in German. Gott ist tot. God is dead. This I could understand. I was not to assume that there was no God, but I could find no evidence in my life that he existed or that he had ever shown any particular interest in me. I was not an atheist, but I was surely an agnostic, and by the time I was 16, I was well indoctored into this theory. Farmer attended University of Washington following graduation from high school. She initially majored in journalism, working various jobs to afford her tuition. During her sophomore year, Farmer became involved with the drama department. The plays put on by the department were citywide events. Farmer performed in several productions for the department, winning favorable reviews for performance in Alien Corn. In 1935, Farmer won a subscription contest for the leftist newspaper, The Voice of Action. The first prize was a trip to the Soviet Union. Farmer accepted the prize despite her mother's strong objections so that she could see the pioneering Moscow Art Theater. Her interest in such topics fostered speculations that she was not only an atheist but also a communist. The same year, she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in drama. It is kind of sad to see that, I mean, this is something that we still have to deal with today, that just because people have a certain interest in something and they want to see far beyond what they were raised with or what they could experience within their own country, they're automatically labeled as something else. And the reality is that yes, she could have been a communist, or she could have been experiencing or thinking of being a communist. We don't really know that. But at the end of the day, the idea that we must ever demonize somebody for showing interest outside of what someone else is comfortable with does not sit right with me, and there was a big problem with that at this particular time. And as you will generally see on this channel when I talk about certain movies or actors, I will discuss McCarthyism and the House in Hollywood, in which they basically just ruin people's careers for either being a communist sympathizer, or just having certain leftist ideas. And it's just unfortunate. I'm glad that that didn't really have an effect on her career, but I can imagine all these ideas that people, even within her own circle and family, would have of her definitely can put a lot of pressure on somebody and affect their mental state. After retiring from the Soviet Union, Farmer stopped in New York hoping to break into theater. She met talent agent Shepard Trobe, who introduced her to Oscar Serlin, a talent scout for Paramount Pictures. He arranged a screen test, after which Farmer was offered a 7-year contract. Farmer signed the contract and moved to LA. She underwent dental surgery to fix a gap in her front teeth. Farmer trained long hours and did several screen tests on the studio lot. In November 1935, she was cast in the B-movie Too Many Parents, a comedy about men in military school. The film was a box office success. Farmer was then cast as the lead in Border Flight. Later that year, Farmer was cast in Rhythm on the Range, her first A picture. She starred alongside Bing Crosby. I had a crush on him since my high school days, and stood in awe of the fact that in my first important film, I was actually working as his leading lady. In the summer of '36, Frances Farmer was lent out to Samuel Goldwyn to appear in Come and Get It. Director William Wyler and Farmer did not get along while filming. Farmer appeared in a few more films, including one from RKO, before shifting her career to the stage. Farmer had become resentful of her time in Hollywood due to the glamorization of her life in the press and the studio's attempt at making her appear and act a certain way. Frances Farmer was a lot more down to earth, and she didn't want to act and dress in a certain way to get any sort of attention or really make the studios look good. This was during the studio system, so the studios really acted as if, or I mean, essentially owned a person and could fine them for a number of things, including dropping out of a production. And it really just sucks because obviously, if you have a specific contract for a film, them fining you for something is understandable. But the way the studios themselves went about it, and that you had to buy your way out of your own particular contract. You may be contracted for a certain number of films or for a certain number of years. In her case, it was 7 years. And it, it just, thinking about what's going on right now with SAG-AFTRA and the WGA, it puts into perspective the way studios act and have always acted, and is that they have ownership and should maintain ownership over the work and the art that people have created and participated in. 1937, Farmer moved to the East Coast to perform in summer stock in Winchester, New York, and Westport, Connecticut. There, she attracted the attention of director Harold Clurman and playwright Clifford Odets. They invited her to appear in a production of Odets' Golden Boy. The play was produced by Group Theatre and premiered in November of 1937, running for a total of 248 performances. At the beginning of the show's run, Farmer received mixed reviews from critics. A review in the Times revealed that Farmer was miscast in the role. Her name drew box office, and the run was a success, and Golden Boy became a Group Theatre's greatest success. By 1938, when the production had embarked on a national tour, regional critics from Washington, D.C. to Chicago gave her rave reviews. To Farmer's dismay, she was not invited to perform in the play's London run. This was probably due to her affair with Odets. He broke up with her, and Farmer believed that they used her box office drawing power to secure funds for the play. The remainder of Farmer's time on the East Coast was not as successful as her time in Golden Boy. Following a short return to LA to appear with her husband in Ride a Crooked Mile in 1938, Frances performed in Elie Kazan's experimental play, Quiet City, and portrayed Melody in Thunder Rock, also directed by Kazan. The play was not received well by critics, and it closed in December of 1939. Farmer went on to accept the role in the Broadway adaptation of Ernest Hemingway's The Fifth Column. She was scheduled to begin rehearsing in early 1940. In order to alleviate her depression, Farmer began binge drinking. She chose to withdraw from the production. This resulted in a fine of $1,500 from the Theatre Guild. Following her withdrawal from The Fifth Column, Frances Farmer returned to Paramount. She appeared in one film before being lent out to Warner Brothers. She returned to the East Coast to appear in summer stock. After a lonely winter spent in New York, Farmer returned to Los Angeles and rented a home in Santa Monica. From 1940 to 1942, things would begin to go downhill for Farmer, as she gained a reputation for being hard to work with. She was cast in a role opposite Robert Stack, but argued with producers over its glamorization. Paramount would suspend her when she refused to take a role. She was eventually let go from her contract. There has definitely been instances in Hollywood where an actor would put up a stink on multiple sets, become harder to work with, in order for them to be let go of their contracts. There was something put in there, of course, because it was drawn up by the studios themselves, so where they could let you go, they could put you on suspension or let you out of your contract, but if the actors were to ask to be let go, then they would either have to pay a hefty fine or what have you. In 1942, things began to take a very dark turn when Frances Farmer was pulled over for having her headlights on in high beam during a wartime blackout that affected most of the West Coast. There are reports that state she didn't have her license and that she was verbally abusive to the police officers. They suspected her of driving drunk, and she was jailed overnight as a result. She was fined $500, given a 180-day suspended sentence, and her license was suspended. She paid half the fine and stayed in her Santa Monica home, refusing to give interviews. In November of 42, Farmer had went to Mexico City to shoot a film that never came to fruition. While there, she was arrested for disorderly conduct and sent back to the U.S. Upon her return, Frances discovered that a family had moved into her home, the doing of her mother and sister-in-law, who put her belongings into storage. Her mother rented her a room at the Knickerbocker Hotel. By January of 1943, Farmer had not paid the remainder of her fine, and a bench warrant was ordered for her arrest. It was during this time that a hairdresser filed an assault complaint against Farmer. She was later seen running down Sunset Boulevard with her top off following a bar fight. When the police came to a hotel to arrest her, she did not go peacefully. Farmer was dragged from her hotel room naked. During the court hearing the following day, Farmer was acting erratically, accusing the officers of violating her rights, and threw an inkwell at the judge. In that interview that I had mentioned at the beginning of the video, Frances Farmer had said that she did not suffer from alcoholism. And if you're continuing to act in a certain way and one of the common denominator here is alcohol, chances are you definitely are an alcoholic. The judge asked Farmer about her drinking habits, and she replied, "I put liquor in my milk, in my coffee, and in my orange juice." She also admitted to regularly drinking Benzedrine. The judge sentenced her to 180 days in jail. While being taken from the courtroom, Farmer knocked down a policeman and bruised another along with a matron. She ran to a phone booth where she tried to call her attorney but was subdued by the police. When they physically carried her away, she shouted, "Have you ever had a broken heart?" With the help of her sister-in-law, a deputy sheriff in LA County, Farmer was transferred to a psychiatric ward in Los Angeles General Hospital on January 20th. During her stay, she was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis, probably the forerunner of a definite dementia paradox. With assistance from the Screen Actors Guild, she was transferred to the Kimball Sanitarium, a minimum security psychiatric institute in San Fernando Valley. Doctors there diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia. She was administered insulin shock therapy. At the time, this was a standard procedure. Her family would claim that they did not consent to the treatment. In Look Back in Love, Farmer's sister stated as such. Farmer herself alleged that she was given insulin treatments for 90 consecutive days. Farmer spent 9 months at the Kimball Sanitarium. Farmer walked out of the institute on an afternoon and traveled to her half-sister Rita's house, over 20 miles away. Went to their mother in Seattle to complain about the treatment she received at Kimball. His mother, Lillian, traveled to California and began a lengthy battle to take formal guardianship of Frances from the state of California. Though several psychiatrists testified that she needed further treatment, Farmer's mother ultimately prevailed. Farmer moved in with her parents in West Seattle, but her mother and she fought terribly. Farmer wrote, "Mom and I had fought, argued, threatened, and screamed until it had finally come down to a climax of two exhausted women sitting across from each other in a small cluttered kitchen. We were enemies who had grown tired of pretending." Following a violent physical attack, Lillian had her daughter committed to Western State Hospital at Steilacoom, Washington. In a 1958 television interview by Ralph Edwards on his This Is Our Life program, Frances recalled her experience.
Well, Ralph is very much like anyone else is admitted to a public institution. They don't have means for individual psychiatric care. There's only so many beds available. I stood in line with 15 or 20 girls like myself in the hospital for one reason or another. We received shots or hydrotherapy baths or electric shock treatments, and this was supposed to relax the tensions and keep us quiet, which it did. I don't blame the hospital at all. I think they did everything in their power to uh, take care of the enormous number of people they had, but I really don't think it helped me much.
3 months later, in July 1944, Farmer was pronounced completely cured and released from the hospital. Shortly after her release on July 15th, Farmer was arrested for vagrancy in Nantucket, California. In January the following year, Farmer's father took her to stay at her aunt's ranch in Yerington, Nevada. Farmer ran away from her aunt's residence. She was discovered several days later at a movie theater in Reno, Nevada, and returned to her aunt's home by police. On May 18, 1945, Lillian, her mother, filed for a sanity hearing for Farmer after she ran away from their home in Seattle. The hearing was held on May 21st, during which the court ruled that Farmer was to be recommitted to Western State Hospital. She remained an inmate at the hospital for 5 years, with a brief parole in 46. Throughout her internment, Farmer remained in high-security ward for violent patients. Following her treatment at Western State, rumors would swirl that Farmer was subjected to a lobotomy, a claim that was popularized in Shadowland by William Arnold, released in 1978. Farmer's sister, Edith Elliot, published a book called Look Back in Love, where she alleged their father stopped the lobotomy before it could occur. Elliot alleged that her father told the hospital, if they tried any of their guinea pig operations on her, they would have a danged big lawsuit on their hands. Farmer herself made claims in her autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning, published after her death. Frances claimed that she was raped by orderlies, gnawed on by rats, and poisoned by tainted food. Chained in padded cells, strapped into straitjackets, and half drowned in ice baths. At the time of her death, Farmer's autobiography was unfinished. Her friend Jean Ratcliffe finished the novel at the behest of publishers, who had given Farmer a huge advance for her story. Ratcliffe alleged that she did embellish larger portions of the book in order to make it more dramatic. This was in part due to hopes that she would secure a movie deal. Following her release from the hospital, Farmer was released into the custody of her mother. Afraid that she might be reinstitutionalized, Farmer fought to have her conservatorship revoked. In 1953, the judge agreed to have Lillian's guardianship of Farmer revoked. She then moved to Eureka, California, where she worked as a bookkeeper. Following a marriage to TV executive Lillian Mikesell, who convinced her to return to the industry, she moved to San Francisco, and with the help of Mikesell, she made her return to television. Farmer's first appearance on our comeback tour was The Ed Sullivan Show. She gave various interviews on TV and newspapers. Farmer was intent on making a return to the stage. She went to Ohio, where she hosted a series that showcased older films. Unfortunately, her happiness with this return to the stage and screen did not stop her from drinking, and she continued to struggle with alcoholism. Following DUI citations and a drunk appearance on air, Farmer was fired from her hosting gig. Farmer began as an artist in residence at Purdue University, and she remembered her time there as some of the best days of her life. In her autobiography, Frances stated that there was a long silent pause as I stood there, followed by the most horrendous applause of my career. The audience swept the scandal under the rug of their ovation. My finest and final performance. I knew I would never need to act on stage again. In 1970, at the time of her passing from cancer, Farmer lived on a farm in northwest Indianapolis. She was 54 years old. The sensationalization of her behavior prior to arrest and stays in the hospital to her years spent in Western State, Farmer's life has been shrouded in myth. It's hard to know what was true and what was a story woven by countless rumors and people who wish to make money off her suffering. What we do know is that Frances Farmer struggled in life with addiction and mental illness that took up a large portion of her short life. While Farmer did cause chaos and was not the easiest person to work with, it is important that we recognize her for her talent and passion. Frances Farmer is more than the myth that she became. Thank you so much to those that took time out of their day to watch and or listen to this video. I really do appreciate it. I will put various articles and anything that I may have read in my preparation for this video in the description box below. And if you want to know anything more, just go down and check those out. I will also put the episode of This Is Your Life. It is available here on YouTube. You can watch it in full. I'll put that in the description box if you're interested. If you are a returning viewer, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you decided to stick around. If you haven't already, I would love if you subscribed. If you're new here, I would like to give you a warm-hearted welcome to the channel. I hope you decide to stick around. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more from me, please give it a like. It would really help me in the algorithm. If you have any thoughts on this or anything you would like me to add to the channel, movies you want me to review, talk about, certain actors, actresses, anybody else in the industry, please let me know in the comments below. Comments can really help out this channel as well. And subscribe and ring that bell to be notified every single time I post if you're interested in more content. If you're interested in more content from this channel. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!